My name is Tom Hosler, and I'm the CEO of the Ohio School Boards Association. Thank you for joining us today to participate in this important conversation. First of all, thank you to Dave Axner, Executive Director of BASA, and Katie Johnson, Executive Director of OASBO. When our three organizations come together to work for students, great things happen. We're here at a very critical time in Ohio, and we'd like to thank Dr. Howard Fleeter and Dr. Greg Browning for their help and support in creating this report that they will go over in detail. We're facing questions in our communities today about taxes. We know that legislators are beginning to wrestle with solutions. And this is a pivotal time for this conversation to take place. We know that at the end of this conversation today, this webinar, we'll be asking board members, treasurers, superintendents, and educational leaders to take this information and engage their communities, engage their legislators, because we need to provide this factual information moving forward. We understand things have to happen. We understand things might need to change, but we're asking for a thoughtful and informed response based on facts. And that's what today is all about. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we appreciate your support. Thank you.
Joining us this afternoon and for your patience as we got through those audio issues. My name is Melena Burney. I'm a legislative services consultant with the Ohio School Board Association. And joining me today is Dr. Greg Browning and Dr. Howard Fleeter of the Ohio Educational Policy Institute. OEPI just released a property tax reform report authored by the two of you that we are enjoying talking about this afternoon. And just to cut to the chase here, high property taxes have been the hottest topic this year. What does your report tell us about how we got to this moment?
I'll start. We were asked to look at this issue, how not only options and ideas going forward, but how did we get here? How did this happen? This has come to life. We've had property taxes for 200 years. It goes all the way back to the early part of the state. And they, of course, continue to be centrally important at the local government level, but also impacted by other state policy decisions. So we kind of stepped back to try to understand what are the trend lines, what's going on here, and discovered four forces that have come together, powerful but familiar forces that have come together to shape this. And so we like to walk you through those four and really begin by reminding folks that we have a lot of political subdivisions in Ohio, moving toward 4,000. It's not new. It's grown over the years, and it means more property taxes, more moving parts, more costs, and more, in some ways, moving services that are at the state level in many states to the local level, MRDD levies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's part of the context. So if you look at these four forces, what comes to mind? Again, no one's going to be shocked to hear these. But first, escalating home values, big increases. In the last 5 years, a 46% increase, which is nearly twice the inflation rate. And while we have House Bill 920 and other tax credits constitutionalized in statute that are pretty rigid and controlling in many ways, nevertheless, for reasons we'll talk about, property values have translated into property tax increases of significance. Second force, Ohio is a big, powerful industrial and agricultural state, has been, but to some degree less so. And because of that, our per capita income, looked at from a national perspective, where it routinely was above the national average, now for many years it's been below the national average at 88% at the last look. And that matters for all the obvious reasons, but it also matters to property taxpayers who have relatively less income to pay their escalating property tax bill. There's a mismatch between the increase in the bill and the increase in their income. We also looked at what amounts to about 20 years of state tax policy changes that have impacted local property taxes. Whether they were intended to impact them or not, and we're not suggesting that all the reasons for these changes are bad, or that many of them came about because of a desired, excuse me, for tax fairness and making Ohio more competitive economically by reducing the tax burden on businesses and on individuals. That has reduced the state-only taxes are now 42nd out of the 50 states. So they're 42nd lowest. That is also, inside of that picture, you also have the state making a decision to step back on paying an eighth of everyone's residential property taxes. Most people probably don't know that the state does that, but it does. But a decade or so ago, it stopped doing it on new levies. That decision, again, impacts local property taxpayers who have to pay a bigger share of the bill. State decisions to cut back on business property taxes also had a big effect. So there are a variety of issues that have reduced the state side and increased the local side. I'll let Howard talk about that. And just one last piece of the puzzle, this our fourth issue really goes to local responsibility. Taxpayers are voting to raise their taxes. They're being asked, and in many cases, they say yes. If not the first time, the second time. And so they're raising taxes at that level as well. Again, with added pressure because of these kind of tectonic plates are moving around. It's created kind of tipping points. You could say a perfect storm that has resulted in all this attention on very high property taxes. With that, I'll turn it to Howard.
Follow up just by saying, that in terms of the time frame where this is happening, that over the last 20 years, we've seen an increased burden of property taxes on homeowners and farmers, right? Because of largely because of the elimination of the business tangible personal property tax, reduction by more than 2/3 of the rate on public utility taxes. So back in 1991, Class 1 property taxpayers, homeowners and farmers were paying less than 50% of property taxes. Now they're paying 68%. And in the same time frame, businesses were paying more than 50%, and they're now paying about 30%. When you couple that with what Greg said about the elimination of the rollback on new levies, people are bearing more of a burden of property taxes now than they were before. For each dollar of taxes now, as opposed to 30 years ago, homeowners and farmers are paying a larger share of that dollar. And so, I've kind of described Ohio's property tax system, with House Bill 920 requiring us to have more school levies and other levies than any other state in the country, as kind of a fragile equilibrium. And what has blown up the equilibrium has been the large increase in residential values that we've seen in the last several years. And we've not seen increases like this since the 1970s, which was what brought about House Bill 920. So we were kind of in a stable state. There have been forces put on property taxes because of declining state support, declining state taxes. Our local share of taxes has been going up, our state share of taxes has been going down. This has all been happening slowly, but when you put the rapid increase in home values on it, that's really what's broken the camel's back. And from the school standpoint, that large increase in home values, that is what has sent so many districts down to the 20 mil floor. There's been a lot of attention paid to districts that use emergency and substitute levies, but back in 2012, we had about 100 districts at the 20 mil floor. And now we have, almost 400 districts at the 20 mil floor. That's not because of 300 districts all of a sudden using emergency levies. It's because of that rapid increase, sending districts to the floor by what I call natural causes.
Mm-hmm.
And just to add to that, if you look at what's going on here, you say, well, our property taxes are going way up. We're in the top 10 nationally. Does that mean we're in the top 10 nationally in terms of state and local support per pupil for primary and secondary education? The short answer is no, that in fact we're actually declining in our national ranking. At the same time, the property taxes are going up, which just is a challenging situation in itself.
Right, right. Was exactly my next question for you. So speaking of the multitude of school levies that we see on the ballot every year, you just said that there are thousands and thousands of them. We saw this kind of connection to school spending be brought up during the state budget cycle earlier this year, where many property tax amendments surfaced that attempted to tamp down on public school and local government spending. And you just said that our 8th place national real property tax ranking doesn't translate similarly to a high ranking in spending per student in primary and secondary education funding.
Right.
Why is that?
So if you look at the data, if you go, the U.S. Census has a huge amount of data on state and local government spending. And if you go back and look at these tables as it pertains to K-12 education, in 2002, Ohio ranked 24th nationally in state revenue per pupil, and we were slightly below the national average. By 2023, we'd fallen from 24th to 41st nationally, and we went from being slightly below the national average to being almost $2,700 per pupil below the national average. So over the same time frame, as you might guess, if the state support for K-12 education is going down, the local support is going to need to go up, right? Because schools need to keep pace with not just inflation, but with increasing demands that are placed on them to provide a lot of services that we didn't provide 20, 30 years ago that schools now need to do. And so Ohio's per pupil, I was expecting to see, when I saw that the state share had fallen so much and the state ranking had fallen, I was expecting our national ranking at the local funding was going to go up. We've actually fallen from 10th to 12th in local revenue per pupil from FY02 to FY23, and we were 26% above the national average in 2002, but we're only 17% above the national average in 2023 on local revenue per pupil. So we've fallen significantly on state revenue. We've fallen in a relative sense on local revenue. When you put them together, Ohio was ranked 15th nationally in total K-12 revenue per pupil in 2002, and we were about $800 above the national average. And by 2023, we've fallen to 23rd nationally, and we're now $1,200 per pupil below the national average. So we have been lagging behind other states in a per pupil sense. And when you look at I'm not going to do it right now, but you can read the report and you can see, when you look at it as the state share of funding for K-12 education, we've fallen from 35th in 2002 to 45th in 2023. So, when we're saying that the increase in home values is maybe what has created the tipping point we're at right now, but there have been these other forces that have been working all along that have been putting more and more pressure on local revenues, not just for schools, but also for other services.
And I would just add that if you assume that every state level tax policy reform was a good idea, it makes the challenges of the moment more difficult. It's not like, because I think mostly policymakers believe that they were trying to do the right thing for the right reasons, and may not have been focused intently on what it meant for the rest of government in Ohio. And there's the bit of a kind of a ecology of public policy, if you will, that you can't keep these decisions in a box. They have a system effects, and that's part of what we're seeing here.
And what I think our report indicates is that just an understanding that these state tax policies have had the effect that they have had, and that understanding then needs to translate into what are the solutions that we're going to need, moving forward to try and fix the problem that we're facing right now.
Absolutely. So what reform options are out there that would get to the heart of this issue, provide that relief for the average taxpayer, but also keep our school districts whole?
You can start.
Okay. So what we have spelled out in a report is a series of policy options. We're calling them options, not recommendations. But what we have done is, we think there needs to be a balanced approach to this, taken from the part of the state that we have several options that involve the state in increasing the homestead exemption, which provides property tax relief to elderly and disabled taxpayers. Those parameters of who is eligible and how much that relief is have not been adjusted very much in the last 20, 25 years, and there's a lot of room for making that more generous, and that would help people that are on fixed incomes that are really struggling to pay increasing property taxes. And, again, that's, I think, if the state can be addressing property tax issues that they saw as they affected businesses, I think they can do something similar to address these issues as they affect people. You can do that as a strategy. There is something called a circuit breaker, which works similarly to the homestead exemption. Michigan is a good example for that. There was a proposal by Senator Blessing a couple of years ago for a Michigan-style circuit breaker, and it was going to be expensive. It was going to be $500 million for the homeowner component, $300 million for the renters component. But Michigan, which is a substantially similar state to Ohio in terms of size, in terms of demographics, in terms of income and wealth, they have had the political will to do this. And Ohio has had 2 chances to do this in the last 2 budgets and has chosen not to. So you can also put, Greg, your idea of some kind of like a cap on property taxes. You can talk about that.
Thought is, our options really, if you distill it down, we limit and reduce the residential real property tax burden for low-income seniors, people with disabilities, and qualifying veterans, kind of building on what we're already doing, but expanding it, making it more significant because the size of the burden is so much bigger. Provide tax fairness and lower tax costs for Ohioans living in school districts at the 20 mil funding floor, which I'll let Howard talk about in detail, of which there are about 2 out of 3 districts are at the 20 mil floor. Third, provide limited discretion for school districts to provide local residential real property tax exemptions, such as a voter-approved homestead exemption at the local level that would largely mirror what's happening at the state level. So that's kind of the distillation. Inside of that picture, you could draw a bright line in the sand for the homestead exemption group, for instance, and say you're not going to pay more than 1% of the value of your home in property taxes. So wherever you are, that's the limit. You can still qualify for a homestead exemption, but including that, 1% is the cutoff. 1% is roughly equivalent to the national average, which is 0.9. So it would be a bright line on a really complex set of issues and give people assurances in the process.
Right. So yeah, and I was given one instruction before this started, which was don't go down the rabbit hole of too many details, and I just violated that a couple minutes ago. Okay. But the general idea of this would be that I think the balanced approach means we need to do something along the lines of the state coming up with direct help to taxpayers that they would see in their tax bills immediately. We could have done this 2 years ago with the 24-25 budget. We could have done it again a couple months ago with the 26-27 budget, and the state chose not to do that. That is the most simple, most direct way to help people in real time right now. At the same time, the idea of getting at the issue with the 20 mil floor districts, that is something, if you do the House Bill 186 approach before they amended it last week, that was something that was going to help this problem moving forward so that we won't find ourselves in this situation again. And the idea there is for however many districts we have at the 20 mil floor, the increases in taxes would be limited to inflation over the same 3-year period that their most recent reappraisal and update will be. So those districts will still get growth. It'll just be limited to inflation. The taxpayers in that district will get protection because they won't have to have an increase more than inflation. That seems to be a fairly reasonable compromise between making sure schools don't bear the brunt of fixing this problem and that taxpayers still get some help. And so you can help things moving forward with that type of a plan, and you can help people now with a plan that involves the legislature finding $200 million to help people immediately. So.
Absolutely. And I think finding that balanced approach is of the unique interests of school administrators who are still looking out for your everyday student who benefits from those tax dollars going to their district and providing opportunities for them.
Well, I mean, in a word, the partnership got us here, and the partnership needs to stay together and be balanced going forward. That's the working assumption.
Right, and the last thing I want to add, right, is Greg talked about how many taxing jurisdictions we have, and we've heard a lot of discussion in the last month or so about we've got the 5th largest number of school districts in the country, we've got the 5th largest total number of local governments in the country. What many people who make those statements leave out is we also are the 7th most populous state, and so I took the time a couple weeks ago to figure out, well, on a per capita basis, do we have a lot of school districts and local governments? And the answer is we're in about the same place on that as we are on most other things. We're somewhere in the 20s in terms of the rankings of that. And so I don't think this is an issue where, you're not going to solve this problem by consolidating school districts or local governments, right? You've got to take some of the steps that are along the lines of the things that we've outlined that really get at the root of the problem, which is helping taxpayers directly and then placing some reasonable limits on how much taxes can increase when we're in an unusual period of time like we have been the last several years when property values are going up much, much higher than historical norms.
And of course, I agree with Howard, but we also had in there that we all understand that there can be better ways going forward when it comes to shared services, productivity improvements in any organization, and that's not the answer, but it can be part of enhancing the partnership going forward in ways that ought to be locally driven, where the pros at the school district level are in charge of figuring out what makes sense.
Well, I want to thank both of you for your work and your expertise on this issue. We really appreciate you giving school administrators such valuable insights. If you're interested in reviewing all of the information that Howard and Greg just walked us through, as well as those in-depth policy options, those are available on OEPI's website under the Property Tax Research tab. We're going to take a momentary break. When we return, your association lobbyists from BASA, OASBO, and OSBA will be here to share how you can take this information from Dr. Fleeter and Dr. Browning and use it to advocate for your district with state lawmakers.
Thank you and welcome back. Just want to again extend a thank you to Dr. Fleeter and Dr. Browning for being with us today to explain the report. We're going to talk next about the governor's work group. This was created as a response to his vetoes, and Paul Imhoff is going to share what they've been talking about over the past couple months.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Let's jump into it. So the governor tasked this group, and I'm going to quote here, with thoroughly examining issues to provide meaningful property tax relief to homeowners and businesses while ensuring that funding for local schools, fire, police, EMS, libraries, and developmental disabilities is adequate. This working group has two co-chairs. First of all is Pat Teaberry, who's the president and CEO of the Ohio Business Roundtable, and also Bill Seitz, a former state representative and state senator from the Cincinnati area. The group has two county auditors. It has a county treasurer, a mayor. It has three county commissioners, and most important to us, two school superintendents, Dr. Stephanie Starcher from the Fort Fry local schools and Dr. John Marshausen from the Dublin City Schools. I do want to pause here and just thank Stephanie and John have just done a great job on this group. They have worked really hard at all the meetings that have been public and that we've been able to attend. They have been advocating for the 80% of kids who attend one of our public school districts in Ohio. So again, thanks to Stephanie and John. So the group first met in July, and they have been meeting weekly, and their final recommendations are due tomorrow. And so we don't know what those are yet, but throughout all the meetings and all the discussions and the things they've talked about, we're starting to have a sense of things that could be recommended. So I just want to give some examples of some of the things we're expecting But again, to be sure, we don't know yet, and we will know tomorrow. And of course, we'll let all of our members know when we have those. The first is we are expecting them to recommend the passage of House Bill 186 prior to the amendment that came out last week. And Nicole's going to be talking more about that bill in just a few moments. When it comes to the authority of the county budget commissions, I do expect them to recommend that we need a definition for the words unnecessary and excessive. So county budget commissions have a standard for looking at levies. They also, I think, are going to tell us that new levies should not be able to be reduced or eliminated in the first term or a levy or for 5 years if it's a continuing levy. And I expect them to say that renewal levies cannot be reduced in the first 2 years. As far as carryover cash balances, I know we're all following that. They have had a lot of conversation about saying that the cap should be a soft cap at the 100% level. So at that level, it would trigger a conversation with the county budget commission, but not anything automatic. And I also look for them to say that that should be applied not just to schools, but to all taxing groups. One of the things I know is very important to us is what's going to happen with the 20 mil floor. I do expect that they're going to recommend that existing emergency and substitute levies would count towards the floor upon their expiration or renewal or after 5 years. So it would be a slower move to what we've already seen coming out of the House. But we do need to be clear, if this were to happen, and again, this is better because it would be a slower move, but it would still result in over about 200 districts coming off the floor. Another thing I think they've been talking about, I expect to see, is that districts who currently have an emergency or substitute levies would be permitted to renew those levies under the new title of a fixed sum levy, and also would be able to keep that 12.5% rollback and owner-occupied credit for levies that were passed in 2013 or earlier. That is a big deal because without that, and this has been reported across the state, we would be seeing almost a $100 million property tax hike across the state of Ohio. They've talked about a tax deferral program for senior citizens where they can pay their taxes when they sell their home or when they pass. They have talked about House Bill 156, which is a property tax credit for seniors and disabled folks, and they've talked about supporting that. And they've also talked about closing the LLC loophole, which of course we are all very much in favor of that. And then finally, they have talked about putting in place another working group to look at the number of local government entities and to encourage more shared services. So again, we will see a report for them is due tomorrow. We will get that out to all of our members, and then the question is going to be, what is the General Assembly going to do with this? And the answer to that is we're going to have to wait and see. Thanks, Nicole.
We are. I think that's going to be the interesting response. I think various legislators may have a different opinion based on what comes out in that report. And the House and Senate may also have a different opinion on what they see from that report. But I appreciate Dr. Starcher and Dr. Marchhausen's work on that work group. They've done an excellent job for schools these past couple months. But we are heading into the fall where property taxes is still the topic of discussion. We've had it for over a year now. So I know as we continually talk about, we are in times where we need all school districts to engage. And I hope that this report provides districts what they need to help with those conversations. House and Senate are back. So they came back kind of last week with committees. The House seems a little bit more ready to move on property taxes versus the Senate. The Senate is still pretty much where they were during the whole budget. They don't have a lot of bills that have been introduced that addresses various property taxes. They're all coming from the House. So it's almost like the House wants to have the conversation first. What we see with the overrides, we know there's one on the table that the Senate may take up here in the next couple weeks. That's the types of levies that school districts can put on the ballot. It's not going to be a savings to taxpayers. It's actually going to increase what they're paying on their tax bills due to the elimination of being able to put emergency levies and substitute levies and being able to renew those. So I hope that they look at the report that not only the property tax work group does, but also Howard and Greg's to see what that impact is going to be. And it's going to raise people's taxes even further. And I don't think homeowners are expecting that. We still have two other overrides that the House had attempted in July, one with the county budget commissions and also with the 20 mil floor. Those are two separate overrides that would have to happen. No word yet if they're going to try for them again. I think it's going to be a week by week thing that we have to stay very much on point with, and making sure that we are all paying attention to what potentially could come each week. These next 6-7 weeks while they're going to be in session is going to require all of us to be paying very close attention and having conversations with our legislators, making sure they understand what our district's financial impacts are. And Katie's going to go a lot more in depth about how we can all engage not only our communities, but our legislators. But also want to touch really quick on a bill that is kind of starting to move fast. And so Howard talked about House Bill 186 and what it looked like. And the work group also has talked about House Bill 186. Let's start at the beginning. This bill has kind of evolved, but it's evolving quicker as they've come back. So this was a bill that looked to cap districts on the 20 mil floor to inflation. It was supposed to be prospective, but now we're seeing big changes that have happened in the past week. Before, though, they left for their summer recess, they did remove the components of the bill that would have addressed the inflationary capping with the state share. They've removed that, so any sort of hits that districts are going to be taking, there's not going to be any sort of offset coming from the state. Last week in committee, there was an amendment that makes this retroactive. So districts that had reappraisals in years 2023 and 2024, and based on the numbers that we've seen with the impacted districts, most of the tax savings is going to occur for those in the 23 and 24 schools that went through those reappraisals. There is questions about is it constitutional with a retroactivity clause included. I think the Legislative Service Commission is working on trying to answer those questions, but it's something that I hope you have seen how this is going to impact your district and what that number is going to be, because you need to be reaching out to your districts now. It is a potential that the bill may be voted out of committee on Wednesday. And if you have not talked to your legislators and those who are on House Ways and Means, you need to be picking up the phone as soon as we end this webinar so that they know that impact and what it's going to mean to your districts. Many of you have contracts in place, and this may have an impact on those contracts going forward. And it's important to work quickly, but also with as much transparency and as much information that you can get out as quickly as possible. House Bill 186 started off as a bill that came from the County Auditors Association. They drafted it in a way that they wanted balance. They wanted to ensure that homeowners they were being responsive to the increases, but they also wanted to make sure that school districts were not being harmed with the state funding. And where we are at today, unfortunately, this bill does harm school districts. I would encourage you to, ask legislators to halt and look at these provisions, remove the retroactivity. Let's work on this bill longer. Again, the original bill's intent was to find harmony amongst the two. And if at all possible of getting back there, would be a benefit to both homeowners and also the school community. And with that, I'm going to have Katie tell you how you can reach out.
Well, and thanks everyone for staying with us today. I think we've seen over the last few years the power the education community has when we speak with one voice. If every school district in the state of Ohio told their own story, we would help kind of correct maybe some misunderstandings and definitely reset on what is being said. So right now, our story is being told for us, right? So we're talking about how our districts spend our money. We're talking about our cash balances, about our administrative expenses. And we need you more than ever to help tell your own story and really focusing with your communities and lawmakers about what the impact will mean for your district. So when you're looking at this report that we're going to be sending out after the webinar today, you want to take the numbers and then bring that alive by connecting it to your students, to your communities. That is the greatest impact is if every one of us does that. We've put together a one-pager that we'll be sending out, like I said, and really the powerful thing is to add context, right? So talking about your levy history, your budget challenges, your student needs, and to really do this as a team. So we're most effective when we have our superintendents, treasurers, boards working together and really communicating our story, our finances, the good things we're doing in our communities and for our children as a team on a regular basis. So you're talking to your staff, you're talking to your community leaders, and you're talking to legislators. Make sure that we all have that common understanding, common voice. And we really want to encourage you to continue to collaborate with each other. We've seen some really great things going around the state of Ohio. So I know in Warren County, for example, the school leaders there, they've actually formed a county-wide coalition with the other local governments. And so really broadening our scope of who is included in our story, keeping things local, and really making sure that our legislators, our community understand what decisions are being made at the State House, how that really impacts our local communities. And I want to encourage you to keep sharing out your resources with one another, sharing them out with us, and we'll do our best to get those out statewide. And really, when it comes down to it, if we stay consistent, we all engage, we keep focused on the kids, we can really help shape property tax reform while also protecting the resources that we need to ensure our students have what they need today, as well as have opportunities for tomorrow.
Well, thank you, Katie. Thank you, Paul, for coming in and joining us to not only make sure that our schools understand what's going on with the work group, but legislatively as well as what they can do. Those who have questions in the chat, we will make sure that those are given to both Dr. Browning and Dr. Fleeter, and we will try to provide as much content as we can after if there are questions. But thank you for being with us today. I hope you find the report valuable and useful as you engage your community.